Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for August 6th, 2026. Today we're going to take a look at what is happening across the tropics right now in the Atlantic and the Pacific, and we're going to take a look at new hurricane season predictions which have come out and basically confirm what we already know so far, and that is this year is more than likely going to be a pretty below normal hurricane season, at least in the Atlantic. But that does not mean that activity won't happen, and the models are still picking up on signals potentially over the next 2 weeks from maybe a wave trying to spin up in the MDR, and of course we will talk about the latest on that too. So we definitely have quite a bit to talk about today. First off though, starting off with NOAA, which has released their final hurricane season forecast update today, their August outlook, and well, it pretty much confirms what we've been saying for the last few months. A below normal hurricane season is very, very likely. They give a 75% chance of a below normal season. So, that is pretty fairly certain that things are going to be below average. I mean, 75%, that is well above 50-50. And it's honestly kind of even surprising that they even give a 5% chance at all for any above normal activity, but especially because their numbers definitely do not get anywhere near that, and they even have the lower range here of 7 storms, 2 hurricanes, and 0 majors. But they do still give a decent range of activity, anywhere from 7 to 13 storms, 2 to 6 hurricanes, and 0 to 2 majors. And again, this basically confirms that this year is more than likely going to be a below normal hurricane season. And of course, the main factor behind that is El Nino, which, as I talked about in yesterday's update when we specifically went over El Nino, is just continuing to get stronger and stronger and break new records with each passing week. And that will likely continue at least until the fall as this El Nino continues to strengthen. And obviously, El Nino has a huge, tremendous capping effect on the Atlantic. And I mean, there's just no way you're going to beat super El Nino intensity this year and, try to overcome that. So very likely the Atlantic here will be below normal this year. And obviously, we are already in the midst of that because nothing is happening here over the next 7 days, according to the National Hurricane Center. And yes, that might change beyond 7 days as we get towards mid-August, but things are shut down right now, and so far throughout the hurricane season, at least, they've been almost completely shut down. Dry air, shear, plaguing the tropics, and any development that we've had this season was closer to home, with Arthur and Bertha both being in the Gulf. But again, could that change over the next few weeks? The models are seemingly still remaining adamant that something is going to come out of here, at least in the eastern Atlantic, over the next 2 weeks as we get towards mid-August. And these tropical waves here, even though conditions are very unfavorable, Africa is still producing some aggressively strong tropical waves. And I'll show you the satellite picture for that in a little bit. So maybe this tropical weather bulletin will change, but I think the overall picture of this season has not changed. And in fact, I think now that we are well into August and we are seeing all of the factors that we talked about going into the season playing out, it is very likely the Atlantic overall will end up above normal. But enough talk about that. Moving on to the Eastern Pacific, though, because things are getting active there. Once again, we have 2 AOIs here. Both of them are at a low chance right now, but I have reason to believe that they will probably not stay at a low chance. The models are definitely lighting up here in the Eastern Pacific with activity, and potentially this western one here might actually be a pretty interesting storm to watch for potential impacts to Hawaii. And yes, it is in the long range when we see some ensembles, head towards that area, but as we expected with this kind of hurricane season in the Pacific, lots of activity, and especially lots of activity towards the Central Pacific. So either way, those in Hawaii will need to watch out. And obviously, those closer to Mexico too. And in general, if you are in the Eastern Pacific, you will have to keep an eye out on things here. And very likely, we're going to continue to see activity uptick as we go into the month of August. So this is just the beginning. Taking a look at a satellite shot of the Atlantic right now. And again, nothing much is happening here across the basin. Throughout most of the MDR, we still have dry air and shear plaguing the tropics, keeping everything shut down. But closer to home here, there is a little bit of an interesting disturbance just to the east of the Bahamas. Not tagged by the National Hurricane Center, so you know that this doesn't really have a chance at actually developing. Although maybe if this actually had a little bit more of a favorable setup, it might have been able to develop. I mean, definitely producing quite the decent amount of convection today. But that's what this is going to be. This is going to be a rainmaker and bring moisture to the Bahamas and Florida and potentially throughout the southeast this coming weekend. And I do believe this disturbance here was actually what the models were hinting at the beginning of the month, about a week ago, if you remember, something potentially developing here off the southeast coast. But as I said before, this is likely going to move inland into Florida and the southeast this coming weekend. So obviously that'll kind of shut down any chance of development this has. But regardless, rainfall and gusty winds and, an impact to your weekend weather will definitely be felt here. And, that is enough. These weather systems are bigger than you, so they will definitely have an impact on your life, whether or not they are, designated or not. And I mean, we've even seen instances in the past here, many instances in the past of impactful disturbances, tropical designated, that still brought lots of heavy rain and some pretty serious impacts. So definitely don't count this out entirely, but in terms of tropical development, not looking likely. But going back here to the eastern Atlantic, as I mentioned before, we are continuing to see these tropical waves emerge off the coast of Africa. There was, if you remember earlier this week, there was one that came off the coast of Africa pretty aggressively, but that is, moved west now, and it's probably this piece of energy here. But just today and last night, yet another wave moved off the coast of Africa and is now emerging in the eastern Atlantic, just south of the Cabo Verde Islands. And you can see it definitely has quite a bit of decent convection with it. And look behind it, another wave potentially following right behind it, loading off, about to come off of Africa too. So we are continuing to see an uptick in these strong tropical waves moving off the coast of Africa, and I think the biggest reason for that is quite simply climatology. As we now head into August, naturally things start to become more favorable for these tropical waves to be stronger as they move off the coast of Africa. Now, obviously, there still is the impact of the dry air and the shear from the super El Nino that is definitely going to continue to keep a cap on things in the Atlantic. But as I said before, the more of these aggressive, strong tropical waves which move off the coast of Africa, as we continue to progress deeper into the month, you would think that one of these waves at some point would break through and end up developing out here, even if just for a brief period of time, or maybe at some point, developing further west. Development at some point is my point, and as we've been talking about for at least the last week or so, the models are indeed hinting at these waves potentially becoming interesting in terms of tropical development in the near term, or not necessarily near future, but in the somewhat near future, maybe about a week or two from now. But again, we will talk about that in just a little bit. But taking a look at the vorticity signature, you could see that there is definitely some pretty decent vorticity in the eastern Atlantic right now, again, associated with these waves, which are moving off the coast of Africa pretty strongly. And these tropical waves are our seedlings for tropical development after all, and especially this time of year as the eastern Atlantic generally starts to become more favorable. We eventually would have to watch these waves to see whether or not at least one of them can spin up, and that's the point that I'm trying to write home right now, or drive home right now. And I think it's definitely something that we should be keeping in mind here over the next few weeks. You could also see, though, the vorticity signature of that disturbance here in the Bahamas. Nothing too, crazy, obviously. It's not like that there's a developing low-level center, and obviously, again, this is going to just crash into the southeast here this weekend, so this won't have enough time to do that. But it is interesting nonetheless, and it does show that this disturbance here does pack a little bit of a punch even if we won't see development. Moving briefly to the Eastern Pacific right now, just to show you how things are there. Nothing interesting popping up right now. Actually, again, still kind of in a little bit of a quiet phase for a moment, but as I showed you before, that quiet is likely not going to last long, as we once again do have two areas of interest to watch here after all, and one of them will probably develop fairly closely here to Mexico over the coming days. Not sure if the piece of energy is present in the Pacific Basin right now, but again, we're watching for, or more solidly watching for development signals in the Eastern Pacific, probably over the next week. But over the next 2 weeks in the Atlantic, let's take a look at the models here. This is the 12Z ensembles for today. And actually, even over the next week here, you're already starting to see some pretty aggressive ensembles showing up here in the MDR. And this was appearing on some of the AI models, especially the European AI ensembles were pretty aggressive for the last week or so. But today, especially, it looks like the European is really starting to come on board with something happening here. And you could also see, especially as this gets towards the Caribbean, you could definitely see the classic effect of shear kind of causing, this wave on most of the ensemble members here to completely fall apart. But there is still some hint of development here, nonetheless, in the MDR. And I must mention that it does not seem to be just one ensemble member here. Maybe there's another one too as well that follows behind in terms of wave signals here. So once again, the models are continuing to light up here in the MDR over the next 2 weeks. And one of the models that were lighting up before the European seemingly has become more aggressive today, the AI models, or at least this is the Google AI, still showing something. So both of the models here have signals in the MDR. Again, I think we're going to need to watch here very closely over the next few weeks. And I think at least one of these signals probably come from a wave, I would presume already, maybe even this wave here that's just emerged off the coast of Africa today, or in the very least, this seemingly even more aggressive wave behind here. I mean, take a look at the convection it's producing right now. They definitely look very menacing, and that seems to be what the models are picking up on here over the next week. So all I'm saying is we will have to watch. Will one of these waves at some point get lucky and try to briefly spin up here in the MDR as it eventually, moves on off to the west-northwest? And, maybe down the line it might be a little bit of a concern for minor impacts to the Caribbean, but obviously we will have that El Nino shear to meet it as it gets into the Caribbean, so we probably won't have any concern beyond that. But at least while it's in the MDR, will it have a chance at developing here over the next week to 2 weeks? We will see, but the models are definitely showing something, and since they're showing something, especially this time of year in August, it definitely warrants at least some attention. So we will be watching closely here the MDR over the next week to 2 weeks to see whether or not the models are right and we do get development to actually produce. The Eastern Pacific, though, is definitely going to warrant a lot of attention as well, probably in terms of coming to life much more than the Atlantic will. You can see here the European ensembles also pretty aggressive on development today, especially of this area here in the Central Pacific. And as I mentioned before, you have a decent amount of ensembles that move in the general direction of Hawaii. In the long range, this ensemble plot here goes all the way out to 2 weeks, and when we do see anything that gets close to Hawaii is definitely beyond the 7-day time frame. But the signals are there, and as I've said before, especially the Eastern and Central Pacific this year are going to be very active. And now that we're entering the month of August, the Eastern Pacific too also really sees a major uptick in activity. So I definitely expect more of these potential long-range Hawaii threats to continue to emerge. Whether or not they will actually produce and we actually get a storm that gets very close, if not over Hawaii, remains to be seen. We keep on having these threats in the long range, but they kind of shift away as we get closer in time, which is obviously lucky for the island of Hawaii. But even with this too, eventually you would think one of these storms would break through and actually make an impact on Hawaii. So if you are in the Hawaiian Islands over the next 2 weeks, you'll definitely want to be keeping an eye out on the tropics in the Pacific very closely. And even in Mexico, too, if you are along the Mexican coastline, as activity in general here in the Eastern Pacific will ramp up over the next 2 weeks, you'll want to keep a very close eye on the tropics as well. And what is the biggest reason, and I think the most obvious reason at this point as to why activity is going to ramp up here significantly, more than likely in the next few weeks in the Pacific? El Nino, which continues to crank and strengthen and strengthen and strengthen as the weeks go by. The anomalies here in many areas are reaching as much as 3, and you're starting to even see a slither, a decent slither, not just a small slither, like an actual decent tongue of anomalies here along the Pacific, up to 4 degrees Celsius above normal. And you're even starting to see pockets of, reaching the upper end of the scale, maybe even 5 degrees Celsius above normal. And, I can't really describe just how extreme of an event this is, but especially, just in general, how much, extreme extra amount of energy this adds to the ocean, which is why El Nino really does have a significant impact. El Nino is probably one of the number one, driving forces of global weather patterns. And obviously one of those global weather patterns is a very, very strong jet here through the Atlantic, which of course induces lots of westerly shear and dry air over the Atlantic, which shuts down the Atlantic hurricane season, but obviously on the other hand, produces lots of rising motion and in general a very favorable base state for the Pacific to really pop off with activity. And more than likely, once again, we will see the Pacific take advantage of that here probably in the coming weeks. But even in the Atlantic, once again, sea surface temperatures continue to warm up, and they especially continue to warm up here in the Eastern Atlantic. So you would think that, again, as we get closer towards the peak of the hurricane season, something will break through here in the Atlantic and, give us something to talk about. But again, with the Nino 3.4, El Nino just continuing to go up and up here. The latest value at 2.5 degrees Celsius in the Nino 3.4 region, well exceeding above Super Nino threshold. And while this is crazy already, and it's only early August that we are already at well above Super Nino threshold here, it is not done intensifying. And when this is all said and done, we probably are going to reach well above 3 degrees Celsius in the Nino 3.4, maybe even getting, at this point, close to 4 degrees Celsius. The MDR, though, again, as I mentioned, continuing to warm up here over the last few weeks. And it's really funny, but it really does seem like this time of year, early to mid-July especially, there always seems to be an uptrend in sea surface temperature anomalies here in the Atlantic. And you especially saw that very prevalently happen here in the second half of July. But even before then, even from the start of June and late May, the Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies have come a long way. So we are now getting closer towards the peak of the hurricane season. Will this have an effect and, maybe, again, add a little bit of oomph to the atmosphere to at least attempt to try to cancel out some of the overbearing factors of the Super El Nino? We will see. Obviously, it's clearly not going to be enough. And again, in the end, this hurricane season in the Atlantic will likely end up below normal, maybe even pretty below normal. But in the very least, I would still expect something to happen here. And regardless, it is just interesting to see the Atlantic warm up here over the next few weeks. But we will all see what comes out of this as we get closer and closer towards the peak of the hurricane season now that we are in August 6th. So that is definitely coming up. A look at the actual sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic right now, and they are definitely very, very warm, especially in the Western Atlantic here. Very, very widespread pockets of 29, even many areas here reaching up to 30 degrees Celsius, and especially in the Gulf, warming up once again. Remember, the northern Gulf especially cooled down for a decent bit of time after Bertha, and we saw some upwelling because of that. Well, definitely has all gone away now, and we are back to seeing 30, widespread 30s, and even 31s once again beginning to show up here throughout the Gulf. but I'd especially be interested here off the southeast coast and in general in the southwestern Atlantic. Very, very warm sea surface temperatures, and given the general pattern of El Nino this year, since the deep tropics will be shut down, you would think as well that one of these tropical waves or one storm, if they're lucky enough to get into the southwestern Atlantic, they will have very, very warm sea surface temperatures to work with, and probably still getting even warmer as we are, still just getting into September. So this is still going to warm up, and we might even start seeing some widespread 30s show up here in the southwestern Atlantic once we get to September. So it'll definitely be an interesting place to watch as we get closer towards the peak of the hurricane season. And maybe we will get something to still blow up there. And if that does happen, obviously it would be a concern for the Bahamas, Bermuda, and maybe the southeast coast. So still things to watch here. Even if we have a super El Nino, does not necessarily guarantee that we will see no activity in the Atlantic. But of course, it'll just come down to whether or not something is able to be at the right place at the right time. And then finally, looking at sea surface temperatures here in the Eastern Pacific, also continuing to be very warm, especially off the coast of Mexico here. Once again, seeing widespread areas of 30s and 31s right against the Mexican coastline, and obviously this will aid a lot in getting quite a few strong storms more than likely in the coming weeks here in the Eastern Pacific, but especially the late season. As I mentioned before, these sea surface temperatures are probably going to continue to warm up well into September, and this area will be a hot tub. It already is a hot tub, but it's probably going to be even more of a hot tub once we get to October, and especially with these very strong El Ninos. Always in October do we seem to have that one very, very strong storm that rapidly intensifies a lot, and then turns back eastward into Mexico, sometimes doing so as a major hurricane. And in that general area here close to Mexico, this year is very, very warm, and once again, it's only getting even warmer. So lots of things to be watching here in the tropics over the next few weeks. In the Atlantic, there are a few things, but especially in the Pacific, and we will be keeping an eye out on all of it here as it continues to pan out. With that being said, though, that's going to wrap it up for today's Tropical Weather Outlook. I hope you enjoyed what you saw today, and if you did, I would really appreciate, as always, for you to like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you can get any video the moment I upload it to YouTube. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all of you, and I'll be back with more tomorrow.